Stop thinking this is just a bad office. Chicago is drifting into a credit event, and the warning lights are already slashing inside the biggest lenders. Because when refinancing stops working, buildings do not just struggle, they break. And then, but just break with them. Here's the uncomfortable reality. A dangerous shift is underway in Chicago commercial real estate, and most people will not see it until it hits their street. Not just the downtown landlords, not just developers, everyone who pays tax, runs a business, or leads are known in this city. And it is happening right now in the most fragile part of the pipeline, refinancing. Pause here, because refinancing is the quiet mechanism that keeps expensive buildings alive even when rents fail. It is the air hose, it is the life support, and once lenders start pulling from that hose back, the patient does not recover. The patient goes into distress. Now consider this. Over the next 12 to 18 months, more than $2 billion in downtown Chicago commercial mortgages are rolling towards refinancing windows in a spotlight trance. This is not a headline number meant to scare you. This is a count clock. And here is where things turn. Rates are higher than the last time many of these loans were written. Office demand is bigger. The lenders are no longer pretending the old values still exist. So when a building owner walks into a bank expecting a normal refinance, the bank asks a different question now. But is the building actual worth today? Not in 2019, not in a brochure. Today, let that sink in. Because if the answer is 30 to 40% lower for older office stock, the math snap. The borrower either has to bring fresh cash to the table or accept a much smaller note. And if they do not have that cash, the refinance fails. And this is where the pressure compounds. A failed refinance is not just a problem for one landlord. It turns into forced selling. It turns into distressed pricing. And distressed pricing is how the entire market reprices whether it wants to or not. Think about that. One building sells cheap because it has to. Then the building next door gets valued against that sell. Then the next refinance comes in low. Then another owner fails. Then another. This is how a slow slump turns into a spiral. Now here is the part that nobody expects. People hear commercial real estate and imagine rich owners taking a haircut. But the first people hit are usually the invisible workforce holding these buildings together. Property management, maintenance crews, security, cleaning contracts, elevator service, HVAC vendors, window repair, local suppliers, small companies that depend on predictable building spend. When a building starts bleeding, a first move is cost cutting, and that is payroll by another name. Hundreds of thousands of jobs are exposed across these networks as buildings downshift into survival mode. And those are real paychecks, real households, real neighborhood spending. But here is where it gets worse. Chicago does not have the luxury of a simple private sector downturn because the city's finances are tied to property values through property tax collections. Read that again. When valuations reset downward, the pen does not stay inside a known document. It moves into city budget. Now property taxes are complicated. Assessments can lag. Appeals can drag out. Different classes of property can shift burdens around. But the direction of stress matters. If big downtown values fall, the system has to find revenue somewhere else. Or it cuts services. Or it means on fees. Or it borrows more. And that is where Mayor Brandon Johnson steps into the blast radius. This is not just an economic story. It is governance stress test. Because if revenue gets shakier, when service demands stay high, the political pressure becomes relentless. And it is already a delicate moment. Neighbor costs, public safety debates, infrastructure needs, debt, pension obligations, all of it is heavy. Now add a destabilizing hit to the tax base and a lending pullback at the same time. That is not a problem. That is a squeeze. Now the situation becomes more dangerous because of one word, confidence. Commercial real estate is not priced like groceries. It is priced like an argument about the future, a story about occupancy, a story about rent growth, a story about cap rates and refinancing. When lenders and bond investors stop believing this story, the numbers stop working. And once the numbers stop working, the market does not glide now, it gaps down. Let's walk through the mechanics because this detail matters. An office building has a loan. The owner needs to refinance. In the old world, the bank would roll it over because values were rising and rates were low. In the new world, rates are higher and the building might be emptier and the lender is asked by regulator and risk teams to be stricted. So the bank says we will refinance but only at a lower loan amount. Or they say we will refinance but only if you put in more equity. Or they say we're not doing this deal at all. Any of those outcomes is stress, but the last one is rupture. Because if the lender says no, the owner has to find another lender. And in a tightening credit environment, that next lender is either what expensive or simply not there. This is how a credit freeze begins, not as a national headline, as a chain of polite rejection that quietly turns into panic. And this is why warnings from last lenders matters. When major institutions start flagging risk, it changes behavior across the entire market. Smaller banks tighten. One buyers demand higher yields. Underwriting standards harden. The bar rises. The oxygen thins out. And then something else breaks. The extend and pretend strategy. In past cycle, struggling properties could often buy time. Extend the loan, modify the terms, pretend the recovery is around the corner. But time is not free anymore. Higher rates turn time into a bill, and vacancy turns into a lead. So the window for pretending shrinks. Now consider the psychological side. If you are a lender looking at an older office building with uncertain demand, you're not just lending against today's cash flow. You're lending against a bet that the building will still matter in 5 years. If that bet feels shaky, you pull back. And when enough lenders pull back, the entire city creels in. This is where the fallout becomes personal because banks do not tighten in one lane only. They tighten across the board. If a bank is suddenly worried about exposure, it conserves capital, it reduces risk, it says no more often. That can mean tighter HELOCs, tougher small business credit lines, less flexible auto loans, higher down payment expectations, more paperwork, more denials. And if you think that sounds dramatic, pause here. This is how tightening actually shows up for normal people, not as a single announcement, as friction, as delay, as higher cost, as a door that used to open now barely moves. Now zoom back to downtown Chicago for a second, because this is the anchor point. Downtown office and mixed-use buildings do not just generate taxes, they generate foot traffic, lens spots, dry cleaners, parking garages, gyms, retail strips, service businesses built around predictable daily density. When a building is half used, the neighborhood economy around it does not lose 50%. It can lose far more because margins are thin and fixed costs are brutal. And then the cycle feeds itself. Less foot traffic means more closures. More closures make the area less attractive. Less attractive means companies hesitate to renew leases. More vacancy hits building revenue. Lower revenue makes refinancing harder. This is the spiral in plain language. Now here is the part that should concern you even if you never step into an office tower. When a city's revenue base gets stressed, need a space, ugly choices, cut services, risk taxes, risk fees, increase enforcement, borrow, or some combination that makes everyone angry. And because those choices affect daily life, the political temperature rises fast. This is why Mayor Johnson is under strain in this scenario, not because one building fails, but because multiple systems get hit at once. A refinancing slowdown triggers distress pricing. Distress pricing pressures assessments. Assessment pressure threatens revenue stability. Revenue instability collides with big fixed obligations, and then residents feel this squeeze. Think about it. It is not one crisis. It is stacked pressure. Now let's talk about the 2 billion figure again, because the number is not important only for its size. It is important because it is close in time. 12 to 18 months is not a distant future. That is one leasing cycle. That is one budget cycle. That is one election narrative. That is one stretch of headlines where sentiments can flip. And sentiment matters because sentiment controls capital. Capital controls refinancing. Refinancing controls survival. Now, Does that mean every building defaults? No. And does it mean Chicago is don't? No. But here's the real problem. The market does not need every building to fail. It only needs a concentration of pain at the wrong time. A cluster of last knowns, a handful of high-profile distress sale, a few lawsuits, a few sudden layoffs, a few pension headlines, a few budget surprises, and then confidence cracks. Once confidence cracks, the cost of capital rises again, even for healthy borrowers. And that is how stress prints. Let that sink in. Healthy borrowers can get punished in a sick system. Now imagine you are a contractor who does not work for downtown property. Your invoices get delayed because the building is conserving cash. Then projects get canceled. Then your on credit line gets reviewed because your revenue is down. Now you cut staff. Now those workers hold back spending. Now the neighborhood businesses feel in. This is why commercial real estate is never just commercial. It's a network. And when the network tightens, the city feels smaller, colder, more expensive, more energies. Not here's but to watch because the details matter. What's the language shifts? When you start hearing selective lending and higher standards and concentration limits, that is not corporate jargon. That is the sound of doors closing. What's for more distressed listing? Not just listings, but price cuts that feel irrational. Those are not bargains. Those are forced moves. What's the valuation gaps? A building owner thinks it is worth one number. A lender thinks it is worth another. When that gap widens, deals die. Watch for budget messaging from City Hall. If the tone changes to difficult choices and shared sacrifice and unexpected shortfalls, that is the early warning that the revenue side is bobbling. And bots first spill over into consumer lending. If everyday borrowers start getting denied more often, the tightening has moved from downtime into the rest of the metro. Now this final question, what happens next? Here's the likely sequence if credit keeps tightening. First, refinancing gets more expensive and more restrictive. Second, after you owners cannot close and are forced into distressed actions. Third, distressed sales reset come. Fourth, lenders use those comps to justify even tightened terms. Fifth, layoffs and vendor threats spread. Sixth, property tax appeals surge. Seven, the city faces budget strain. And then the politics get louder. And the market gets even more nervous. That is the loop. And loops are dangerous because they self-reinforce. But the real breaking point is simple. But enough people believe the system is unstable, they behave in ways that make it unstable. Lenders hold, investors demand higher returns, companies delay decisions, consumers pull back, hiring snows, and the city gets squeezed from every direction. So, if you are in Chicago or even near it, do not watch this like it is distant business news because if the refinancing pipeline seizes up, it will not stay in spreadsheet. It will show up as friction in your life. What fees, less service, title credit, weaker hiring, and the city leadership team forced to make unpopular calls under pressure. And the next 12 to 18 months is where this gets decided. One last thought. This scary part is not that the market is changing. Markets always change. The scary part is how fast a refinancing problem can become a confidence problem, and how fast a confidence problem becomes a city-wide stress event. Keep your eyes on the loans, keep your eyes on the valuation, and keep your eyes on the language coming from lenders and City Hall. Because once those three things line up, the breaking point stops being a theory. It becomes the headline.